All right, Chapter 24, Section 2, Clinton presidency. What were the successes and failures of the Clinton presidency? Why he won election, domestic policy successes, contract with America, and its impact. And then we'll look at the Clinton impeachment quick. So when we look at the 1992 election, going into it, Bush has a huge approval rating after the Persian Gulf War, about a 91% approval rating. By 1992, his numbers are sinking pretty quickly. Leaving Saddam in power has a negative impact. But the worst thing is we hit a hard recession, and he had to raise taxes several different times despite that promise, no new taxes. Read my lips, no new taxes. That really comes back to bite him in the behind a little bit later on. On top of that, Bill Clinton is running as a new Democrat. He's not going to be a tax and spend liberal. He's really pushing hard against that. So he's attempting to combine conservative and liberal ideas. So on the conservative side, he's promoting a really strong foreign policy. He's going to be really tough on trade. And he is stealing one of the key Republican babies, free trade, because that's going to grow the economy. And so that is going to bring some moderate Republicans over to his side. When you look at winning the White House, one of the things that also hurts President Bush in his reelection is a businessman, H. Ross Perot, is going to run as an independent. He gets 18% or almost 20% of the popular vote. Almost all of those come from the Republican Party. And so that is how Clinton, who only gets 43% of the popular vote, easily wins the Electoral College. The other thing is Bill Clinton does a pretty good job of contrasting their backgrounds. President Bush comes from a really wealthy family. Bill Clinton came from a very poor family, had to work his way up. And so that contrast helps him out a little bit as well. When you look at his domestic policies, he is going to chart a middle path. Since 1968, Republicans had won 5 out of 6 presidential elections. He realizes that he can't just say that he's not a tax and spend liberal. He has to show that he's not a tax and spend liberal. So he's going to make it his mission to balance the budget. So America debt free by 2013 was his goal. He had the budget going well.
Please call the office. Mr. Ellsberg, please call the office.
He had the budget going well in that direction. He's going to balance limited government with fixing social problems. When you look at signing new laws, the big thing is the Family Medical Leave Act. That allows parents or sons and daughters to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave so that they can take care of a new child, an ill family member, or even for your own serious illness. And this is one of those big things that makes a huge difference in people's lives. What we're starting to see is states are starting to push for more family medical leave, and this is going to be paid family medical leave. So it'll be interesting to see how this continues to go. Now, one of the things that they attempt to do is deal and tackle with healthcare reform. They create a task force. Hillary Clinton's in charge of this task force. They do a lot of research. They do a lot of digging. Here's the issue. The U.S. is the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have healthcare for their people. And when you look at what's happening with healthcare premiums, they are eating up a tremendous amount of people's incomes. Some people have to work a second job just to pay for their family health insurance because their first doesn't cover it. And so the problem is they do this task force, but there's little will to have standardized national health care. And that's one of those things that Clinton's overreached on, and they're going to pay a bit of a price for it. The other thing that's happening is violence. The Brady bill gets pushed during the Bush administration, and the Brady bill is going to limit gun rights. And the Brady bill comes from Brady, who was shot when the assassination attempt on President Reagan's life, and he was permanently disabled because of that. And so when you look at President Reagan, President Bush, and a Republican Congress support this, they're able to get that passed. Jim Brady passed away in 2014. He's one of the few people that was actually able to stand up to the gun lobby and get some gun restrictions taking place. The other thing that's happening is you see domestic terrorism hitting the country. The Oklahoma City bombing, this was a van that was loaded with essentially a fertilizer bomb, destroyed a government building in Oklahoma City. And then in Columbine, you had two shooters go into the school and kill a number of their students. And this really rocks the nation. Newt Gingrich is leader of the House of Representatives. He is trying to figure out a way to gain control of Congress again, to tap into that conservative resurgence that we talked about before. So he's attacking big government. He's stressing patriotism and traditional values. He wants to have congressional term limits, and he wants to have a balanced budget amendment. So there's a whole host of things that he thinks is going to pull those moderate Republicans back into the Republican Party. And he's right. You see a very strong Republican turnout in this 1994 midterm election. They capture both houses of Congress, and you can see that there's always kind of a bit of a backlash for those parties that are in power. And that's why they're talking so much about these 2018, and whenever they talk about midterm elections, it's is the American public going to turn out and vote in these off presidential year elections. Now, one of the problems is the Republicans overreach. They shut down the government based on some issues in terms of the balancing the budget and some of those other things. And because of that, the Republican Party is going to lose some support from moderate Democrats and definitely from moderate Republicans as well. The other thing is Clinton does a pretty good job of moving right on balancing the budget and reducing the deficit. So when you look at this 1994 disapproval rating, he has a 60% disapproval rating and less than a 40% approval rating. So he has very low numbers. The thing is, he's able to ride a booming economy. There's low interest rates, there's low unemployment, and the government is running a budget surplus. So he turned around that deficit to run a surplus, and those things are going to help him win re-election. On top of that, Ross Perot runs again, and again, that's going to hurt the Republican candidate, Bob Dole. But this time he goes from 43% to nearly 50%, and he easily wins re-election. This is where the trouble comes. News comes out about Whitewater Investment Corporation. It was a land deal that went belly up in the 70s and the 80s. And there are people who are close to the Clintons that are involved in that, and they hurt a lot of people financially. They decide to Congress, that's controlled by the Republicans, appoints a special prosecutor to look into this scandal. Even though they don't find any evidence of Clinton's guilt, one of the things that they do find is an affair that President Clinton had with an intern, Monica Lewinsky. And this is where things start to get really messy because they start to interview President Clinton about Monica Lewinsky, and he starts to deny some of the things that the special prosecutor has already found and already knows. And so he gets himself in a little bit of trouble. So they're going to impeach the president. The House brings up, I think, 12 charges of impeachment. They only are able to really nail him on perjury and obstruction of justice. The real issue here is lying about an affair an impeachable offense? And this is the real big challenge that they're going to have in terms of convicting him on these charges. And the Senate ends up acquitting him of both charges of impeachment, both articles of impeachment. And there's Republicans that vote against these charges of impeachment too, because one of the problems you run into is if you can impeach a president for having an affair in office, that's going to mean that other presidents, whether Republican or Democrat, are going to be open to having impeachment for maybe things that aren't impeachable offenses. And so you have to be really careful, and that's what gets interesting too with the present day and things that happen. There's political consequences if you try and go too far.